The recent viral video where Dan O'Dowd and Ross Gerber recorded an incident with a stop sign where Ross's Model S did not appear to properly stop has created quite the internet sensation. Well, one of my Twitter friends has actually gone down the rabbit hole and looked at stop signs and the law surrounding it, and it shows just how tricky all this stuff can be. And this, along with the recent CVPR talks by Tesla's AI team, gives us some insight into how Tesla might go about solving the problems. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I'm going to start by showing the clip with Ross and Dan O'Dowd. Ross is the one driving the vehicle, and Dan O'Dowd obviously is in the passenger seat, and they appear to have a billion cameras in the car. In fact, there's even more that you can't see because I've blown this up slightly. Anyway, I want to go through and I'm going to sort of play it back at full speed once, and then I'm going to look at it a little bit slowed down. But what I want to do after that is go into detail about the complexity of stop sign laws and the fact that human beings are a little fudgy and fuzzy and creative about the way that we deal with stop signs. And that's just one of maybe 200 different types of traffic laws that are out there. It shows how complex trying to figure everything out is, and why even for us humans, it can be very challenging to know exactly what the letter of the law is. In fact, I have a feeling many of you might not even know what your state's specific stop sign laws are. And remember, we can extend this complexity to yield signs, flashing yellow lights, and all sorts of other road rules that can be very, very interesting to try to interpret properly. And then at the end, I will touch on why Tesla's new full self-driving model might actually be a solution to that. I will put a link to that up here if you're interested, and at the end of this video, so you can watch that video. There will also be another one by Phil Den, probably tomorrow if I can get it out, although as it turns out I have COVID, so my brain is rather mush at the moment. I don't feel that bad, honestly. I just feel super, super fuzzy. So I'll try to get that video out, but those ones are particularly challenging when you're not, 100%. So anyway, let's start with this video and let's go ahead and play it back. I'm not going to put the audio in here because it's annoying to try to get that stuff to work, but I will leave a link to the tweet in the description of the video so you can check it out. So you can see here that Ross actually disengages the vehicle. You'll see the little blue light goes off right there. And you can also immediately see that it says, like, why was the autopilot disengaged? So he decided to take over at that point. I'm not sure it was warranted or not. I can't honestly answer the question to that. Actually, if we go back, maybe we can see the noodle, apparently, let's see. Yeah, his steering wheel, unfortunately, is right in the way. So you can see that the truck here is blue and that it actually does identify that as an obstacle to go around. And as his steering wheel is going up here, it looks like that it's mapped out a path to go around it. So I'm not exactly sure why he disengaged. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure because I think that the vehicle would have been fine. It looks to me like just before he disengaged here, it would have been capable of going around and the noodle was going the right way. And the reason why this matters is not so much the fact that he disengaged here, but a lot of times full self-driving is not particularly good if you re-engage it. The first few seconds after you re-engage it, it can be a little bit tweaky and it can miss things. And of course, as it turns out, the stop sign that comes up, immediately after this. So you can see him going around that. And then he goes in and re-engages it right there. Okay, so now it's blue again on there. I have to look at this because the Model S, of course, is different than my Model Y and my Model 3. So I have to look over on the black display instead of the white display. I was looking over here originally and I was like, where the hell is the little blue steering wheel? But anyway, so it's over there and you can see the blue steering wheel's on and it's got the noodle that has showed up here. And if we look at the seconds here, we're at 23 seconds, or if you want to be generous, 22 seconds. So the stop sign comes up very, very quickly after this happens. Right, so here's the stop sign, like the warning that there will be a stop sign coming up, and that's only about 5 or 6 seconds after he re-engaged full self-driving beta. And then proceeding on, you can see that we've got that, and at some point here, he scrolls down, and one of an eagle-eyed viewer actually noticed that he has his foot on the accelerator. I think it might be hovering over it, because normally what you do is you get a message that says that, it won't stop because you're pressing the accelerator, so that means it's your fault. But you can see that the stop sign is here. It hasn't completely visualized it at this point, but as we move through, there it is. So it visualizes the stop sign right here. And if we look, that's about 13 seconds after he re-engages things, but it does actually see it. But what you don't see is you don't see normally the line or something. You'll see like the chevrons that go back. And unfortunately, you can't really see whether the chevrons were there or not. And he starts to take over very shortly after this. So you can see the car is moving through here, and then immediately he goes into manual because you can see that the blue noodle turns off. So that's him. Even prior to the blue steering wheel going off, he has braked, and obviously the lights are starting to turn off as it goes. And so then the light goes away and he comes to a pretty severe stop. And this guy's cutting this corner very, very severely. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I don't want to defend the car because I'm not saying that it actually did absolutely the right thing, but the situation is more complex than you might think. So before we leave this video, let's take a quick look over here at the edge of this. I've blown it up a little bit. As we approach the stop sign, I'm going to sort of drag through. In fact, I'm actually going to play through frame at a time with just using the keyboard, arrow keyboard. So you can see that we've got the blue line, we've got the fat noodle. It's very confident about where it is. It's seeing everything. And where do we actually get the first visualization of the stop sign? It has not visualized it yet, which is not particularly great, but it also doesn't tend to do that. Like if you see speed limit signs and things like that, they don't tend to be visualized until very briefly before you get there. So I think the car is seeing it earlier than that. It just doesn't visualize it yet. But anyway, there we go. So, okay, so we're at right about there. So we're at 35 seconds where it's actually seen that. And let's go forward to the moment that he actually stops. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. So I'll go till the moment where he gets to 0 miles per hour. Oop. Okay. 98765432210. Okay, so we're looking at somewhere around 38 seconds. So we've got about 3 seconds between those two things happening here. And if we move back again to where this gets visualized, what I want to look at is the noodle to see if there's any evidence of things going on here. Specifically, whether we can see any evidence of chevrons in the blue noodle before he disengages, which means that it is beginning to slow down. And second of all, if we see that it's registering that and saying it's going to stop at a stop sign. So if we move through here, you can definitely see that there's something. Unfortunately, this is very fuzzy, but I think it's something like, I think the last two words are stop sign and for, and maybe slowing for stop sign. It might be what that's saying. I can't remember the exact terminology, but it seems pretty reasonable that that's what that's saying there. So it is registering that. The question is, and what I can't see here is whether it's actually got the blue chevrons or not. They're relatively light. Unfortunately, I wish we had Chuck Cook's CAN bus output. Makes me realize just how important that is under these sorts of circumstances. But let's see where he disengages it. So, okay, so that's where he's disengaged it. So he begins slowing down at that point right there. But prior to that, it's really, really tough to know whether there are chevrons there or not. I'm kind of going back and forth, you know. It doesn't appear that there are. So I would say that ultimately that would have been the failure of the full self-driving. It does say slowing for stop sign. I believe that that's what that fuzzy thing right there says, but it doesn't appear to be doing it aggressively enough. And finally, the one other thing I want to look at, because this actually is very, very important to the rest of this discussion, is where is the line here? So as we move forward, unfortunately, it's buried under the blue noodle right now. But as we go forward, you can see he's disengaged and then the noodle shrinks down out of the way. And you can see that there is a line here that it's clearly indicating. And if we back up a little ways, you can see just over the top of the screen, there is a line right there. And so given that context now, let's turn to a spreadsheet. This is all credit to Jake S. Like I said, I will try to figure out a way to put this on like Google Drive or something so you can access it too if you're interested. Very, very generous of him to do this, plus the images that I'm going to show in the near future. But you can see that we can look at most of the states have relatively similar laws. And yes, he looked at every single state, has the codes, has the states, all of that good stuff. But you can see here that most of the states have a similar law, which is that when you come to a stop sign, what you're required to stop at is at the stop line and or the crosswalk. So if there's a pedestrian crosswalk, I believe that that takes precedence always. If not, you stop where the line is. And if there is no line, then that changes a little bit. But basically you come up to the entrance to the other road. So if you've got a junction like this, right, a T junction, you drive all the way up to the edge of that T junction so you can see both directions in order to make a safe progress, turning right, turning left, going straight, whatever. But if there is a line, the place you are required to stop is at the line, not at the stop sign. But then, of course, you can see that there are states that are oddballs, like in New Jersey, it's 5 feet of a crosswalk. In Indiana, it's unclear what it is. It's at the sign, it's the whatever. It's very, very unclear about what the actual regulations are. And Minnesota, if you don't have a line, you actually stop at the stop sign. And Connecticut and Mississippi also have different laws about that too. So immediately you can see, even though most of the United States have similar laws, all of them are very slightly different, and some of them are significant outliers. So again, this is not the easiest thing in the world if you're going to be like, all I care about is the letter of the law and doing things exactly right. It could be challenging. And I would wager that a lot of you, even in the state that you live in, might not know the exact law going around about stop signs, because you probably took your driver's test years ago and you're like, you just drive and you just kind of know that you stop at the stop sign and you do the right thing, right? So that's the basics of how we drive. We usually are like, yeah, we have the basic idea, but if you want to get into exactly what's supposed to happen, then it can get a little bit complicated. And trying to drive exactly according to the letter of the law can actually oftentimes be difficult, compromising, or even dangerous. For example, if you insist on driving the speed limit in a city where everybody drives 10 or 15 miles an hour over the speed limit, you are actually a danger on a highway because you're clogging things up and making people have to slow down and get out of the lane and things like that. So even though it's definitely illegal, not even technically illegal, it's definitely illegal to go 10 or 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. If you don't do that in those circumstances, you're actually more dangerous than you are driving with the flow of traffic. So the long and short of all of this is that it's complicated, right? The real world is complicated. There's a lot of rules, and there's also, how do you follow them? Do you follow them exactly, or do you get a little bit creative as you follow them? So with all of this in mind, knowing that California is stop at the line, not at the stop sign, you can actually see the circumstances of what was going on. This is Sycamore Canyon Road, and again, big thanks to Jake for doing this, but you can see that this would be incorrect stopping. You don't actually want to stop at the stop sign here. You want to go all the way up to where this line is. That is actually the law and the correct behavior. Honestly, in that case, you as a human being would more than likely do this. You wouldn't stop at the stop sign and then have to creep forward another car length or two to come out and be able to see. You would just naturally sort of know that it's where the line is, where you naturally can see both directions, so you can make a safe crossing of that intersection. But this does mean that as he was going through the stop sign and as Ross braked, there is the possibility that the car itself would have braked, although that amount of distance looks like it would have had a pretty hard time. So I'm not blaming Ross for this. I would have definitely stomped on the brake too, because I would have felt like, whoa, it's going a little too fast for those circumstances. But according to the vehicle, it did say, I think, again, it's fuzzy, but I think it said slowing for a stop sign. And it looked like it was slowing down. It was maybe the chevrons were starting to come out. I don't know. But there is the possibility that it would have done that. But when Dan O'Dowd says that it went past blew past the stop sign, it went past the octagonal stop sign, but Ross never even entered the intersection. And of course, that white car that was cutting across was cutting that corner very, very tight. It's a little hard to see because the car is close enough up, but more than likely, he was cutting the edge of this, right? So he was kind of going across the white line and across the double yellow as he was making that turn. Very, very lazy turn, but at the same time, this is also blind, and so probably he didn't even know there was a car coming, and then he was like, woo, so he, as he was cutting really, really close in, Ross was also stepping on the brakes, and it was a blind turn, so there was a lot of stuff happening at the same time. But the good part here is that at least between Ross and the car, they did not go into the intersection and they did not do anything illegal. Didn't look super comfortable because they had to go from 35 miles an hour to 0 in about 1 or 2 car lengths, but it was not illegal. He did not cross into the intersection. So now let's take a look at a few other situations, starting with my own neighborhood here. So this is something I've complained about previously with the stop signs, and actually version 11.4.3 that I currently have actually does it correctly. But previously what the car would do, there's a stop sign right here coming out of my neighborhood, and then there's the stop line way up here, and then actually the intersection with the road is way up there. But as it turns out, from this line, you can pretty well see everything, so that's an adequate place to stop. But what the car used to do is stop way back here, which is several car lengths behind, obviously, maybe 50 feet. I don't know. I haven't actually walked it off or something like that, but it's a good long distance before you get to here. So it'd stop here and then very slowly creep out to here, and then it wouldn't stop there and it would move out into the intersection. So that was scary because, sometimes you're like, whoa, it didn't stop. And then, it would just pull out into traffic and everything, and it would be fine and all that stuff. But it was not great. But what it does now is, as a human would do, it ignores the stop sign. It just notes that it's there. It sees it, but it comes up to the stop line and it stops there and then makes a left or a right-hand turn. And of course, that follows Georgia's state law, so that all is to the good. And it's a good thing we're seeing improvements that the full self-driving team is making. This is one of those things you wonder if at the beginning anyone actually sat down and looked at the legal requirements of everything. Probably somebody has done this. If not, then maybe they can use Jake's wonderful spreadsheet that he did for all 50 states. But for every state, there's a little bit different laws about how all of these things have to work. So it's one of those things where you don't think about it as a human driver. You just sort of do it. But when you have to actually explicitly tell the car what to do, there's a lot of variables involved. And there's a lot of things like, how do you tell it to ignore the stop sign, even though it sees the stop sign, go up to the stop line? That's not the easiest thing in the world to explicitly express to a computer. And then we have a few other instances. Here we don't have a line at all. So there's a stop sign right here, but what you're supposed to do is come all the way up to the edge of the road. So again, you ignore the actual stop sign in terms of where to stop. You just move forward until you get to the edge of the crossing road. And to the right of that, you can see another situation that's just like that, right? The stop sign is way, way, way back here, but you need to pull way up to the front in order to get visibility, in order to see whether you can proceed or not. Same thing on the bottom left here. And then the bottom right is really interesting because there's a stop sign and a stop line and a crosswalk. So I guess that the precedence, at least in this state, at least according to him, is that you should stop at the stop line before the crosswalk and then do that. And I believe if there isn't a stop line, then you're required to stop at the beginning of the crosswalk or just prior to that. So there's, again, the complexity of like, how do you handle a situation with a line and a crosswalk, which is the spot you stop at? It makes sense that this is logical that you would do that because obviously you don't want your car sticking into the crosswalk as it's stopped. And so it makes sense that this is right. But again, how do you explicitly tell the car? There's lots and lots and lots of these kinds of intersections. And actually, my European friends were just saying on Discord today, they were talking about how the United States is stop sign happy. We have stop signs everywhere, like way more than we actually need. And we could have yield signs in a lot of places instead of stop signs, but we are stop sign happy. So we have it. And that's one of the reasons why people ignore stop signs so much, is because they're just excessively placed. So as you start getting outside of the United States into places like Canada, Mexico, Europe, all of that kind of thing, you're going to get different modalities of all of this stuff too. And then this last one, I believe this is near Jake's house or something. He said this is really annoying, but what he's got is this really big oversized stop sign right here, but it's kind of for the people going to the right, not people going straight. So you need to completely ignore this stop sign if you're going straight and go up to this line, which is still, reasonably distance before the actual intersection itself. So this again is a fairly complicated thing. And what he says is that most of the time the car actually stops way back here when it sees the stop sign, and then it has to go 80 feet creeping forward till it gets to the line, and then it pulls out and goes into traffic. So clearly that's not a good situation. You have to figure out how to deal with that. But again, every single one of these situations is just a little bit different. And if you have to be explicit with the vehicle and you have to tell the car, imagine having if-then statements, the old school way, software 1.0, where it's like, if you see this, then do this. If you see this, then you do this. And don't even worry about how you actually describe this to the car, because it's not that easy. It's not like, if you see a stop sign, do this. You have to detect the stop sign first. So that's not that easy either. But just assuming that you could say, if you see a stop sign, stop, it's not that simple. There's, if you see a stop sign, stop. If you see a stop sign over to the right and there's a line over to the left, go over and do this. If you see one with a crosswalk and there's a line, do this. If you see a stop sign but you don't see a stop line, then go to here and do this, right? So you just have this gigantic list of conditionals that would come out with software 1.0. Even with a neural network, this can get really difficult. The challenge for that is, how do you label everything? How do you explicitly tell the vehicle where it's supposed to be going at any given situation, because there are so many different situations just in one state, and then you can move past that state and it gets difficult, and then you move outside that country and it gets more difficult, and outside of, into the global situation, and it gets even more difficult. So it's pretty crazy. As Ashok Elluswamy said, I think he said that his dream was to be able to have Tesla's full self-driving be able to drive in Mumbai or something like that, in very, very dense Indian, Nepalese type of traffic. And that is a completely different type of environment than what we're talking about here. It's almost more of a fluid flow, the way everything works with them, than it is actual traffic laws or anything. So once you get to that point, it's really impossible to explicitly explain everything to the computer. So that, of course, brings us to the question of, well, if you can't do that, if it's intractable to tell the computer every single possible edge case, every single possible, exception to the rule, all of these things, how do you resolve this problem? Well, the way you do it is to allow the computer to create its own ontology. It creates its own understanding of the world by building its own world model, kind of the way that babies do that. And again, I will put a link to Shark's Talk, my review of that, at the end of this video, because these sync up completely. And I will also put Phil's video at the end of this too, once I get that one done. But the way full self-driving, the neural network stack needs to learn is more or less the way a baby learns. And if you've ever had a little baby in your house, raised one or something, you see like a kid will just take a thing and drop it off their high chair over and over and over again, or something like that. And it's really annoying as a parent because you have to keep picking it up. They drop it, and you pick it up, and they drop it, and you don't pick it up, and they cry, and all of that kind of stuff. But what they're doing is they're building a world model. They're saying, this is a three-dimensional world I live in. There is this thing called gravity. I don't have a word for gravity, right? The baby doesn't have gravity as a word, but it conceptualizes that by dropping something over and over again. And 100 times out of 100, it goes down. It never goes up. And I think that's one of those situations where if you ever give a kid at just the right age something like a helium balloon, and you hand it to them and they let it go and it goes up instead of down, it just, like, you see their mind just explode because it's one of those things where they're like, whoa, that's not the right thing. Everything else I ever drop in the world goes down, and that thing's going up, right? So it's that sort of a thing where it's a human baby is building up a world model to understand the world in an intuitive way that it personally understands how all of those things work. It doesn't necessarily need words or anything, but it's building its own internal language. Like, if you have a kid raised by wolves or something like that, one of those old stories, that even without language, a human child, and animals for that matter, understand the world well enough to interact with it very, very on a sophisticated level. But of course, we have billions of years of evolution behind us, and the computer doesn't, and it's very, very complicated, and it takes immense amounts of compute resources to make something like this happen. And so again, you should definitely watch the video that I just did on Ashok, because he actually talks about that kind of stuff. But I hope going through these examples here today shows you just how complicated and pernicious this seemingly simple problem is. We think stop signs are simple because we're just used to driving them the way that they more or less need to be driven. Whether that's exactly following the letter of the law or not, we drive them in ways that are effective for us. And when you see somebody who doesn't, and who's like creeping and too cautious and all that kind of stuff, it's really, really annoying for us, normal drivers. So what we have to do is we have to get the car to get to that point where it can understand the world in an internalized fashion without people having to explicitly explain everything. And if and when Tesla is able to make this last step, that is when full self-driving is really going to become something that can become level 3, level 4, level 5, fully autonomous. And that will be something to be very excited about. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and my Twitter subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And if you want to join the team, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a car, a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.